The Adventures of Tintin, a novel by Alex Irvin, based on the screenplay by Stephen Moffat and Edgar Wright and Claude Cornish, based on the Adventures of Tintin series by Herger. Chapter 1. Tintin was getting his picture painted in the old street market with his dog Snowy laying at his feet. Around them swirled the typical activity of the market on a bright sunny day. People sold everything from fruit to art to t-shirts for tourists. The cobblestones of the town square were bustling with families out enjoying the pleasant weather, unusual for Europe at this time of year. Members of a brass band wearing red jackets were playing some kind of oompa number on a gazebo bandstand near a small Ferris wheel full of giggling children. Tintin bobbed his head to the rhythm of the music and then stopped when he remembered that he was posing for a picture. "Very nearly there," the artist said. "I have to say your face is familiar. Have I drawn you before?" "Occasionally," Tintin said. His boyish face had a smattering of freckles, and his reddish blonde hair flipped at the front in an irresistible cliff. Of course, I've seen you in the newspapers. You're a reporter?" Snowy whined at Tintin's feet. The wire fox terrier's stub of a tail twitched, and he sat up to scratch behind one of his ears. Snowy's name came from his white worry coat. He was very smart. Sometimes Tintin thought Snowy was as smart as most people he knew. Snowy was still a terrier, though. As most people he knew. Snowy was still a terrier, though. Terriers headstrong and easily bored. It was hard to keep him sitting down long enough for Tintin to do something, like getting a picture painted. "I'm a journalist," Tintin corrected him. Reporters ran around yelling for quotes. Journalists hunted down stories and unrevealed clues to uncover the truth. Tintin thought this was an important distinction. "Be patient, Snowy, not much longer." Snowy looked up at Tintin, waiting to see the part of the market where the food vendors gathered. There were always fine snacks to be had there. He looked around at the people, seeing mostly feet and legs, and swinging bags full of market goods. Then he saw something interesting. A man was moving smoothly through the crowd, picking the pockets of the market patrons as he went. A crime, Snowy thought. He trotted after the pickpocket, watching as the man relieved another distracted pedestrian of his wallet. Tintin did not notice that Snowy had left. He was concentrating too hard on sitting still, posing for his picture. "There," the artist said. "I believe I've captured something of your likeness." He showed Tintin the picture, and Tintin admired it. The artist had done a good job, he thought. Tintin looked at himself on the paper and saw his hair with the flip at the front that no amount of combing or wetting could flatten. He was wearing his tan spring overcoat over a blue sweater and a white shirt. In the picture, he was looking off to the side as if he had just seen something very interesting. It looked like he was about to go off in search of a mystery and adventure. He liked it. "Not bad," he said. "Snowy, what do you think?" Tintin looked down. Snowy was nowhere to be seen. Snowy? He looked around, wondering where his adventurous little dog had run off to. The artist cleared his throat and Tintin handed him money for the portrait. Then he strolled through the market, keeping an eye out for Snowy. The portrait rolled up and stuck in his pocket. He did not see that others were keeping an eye on him from a bench not far from the bandstand. There were two newspapers, each with two eyes cut out in the front. Two pairs of eyes tracked Tintin's progress. Tintin heard Snowy bark from somewhere in the crowd. He stopped and called out, "Snowy!" A stall full of mirrors for sale reflected his image in a most confusing way. He saw himself from a dozen different angles with a dozen different backgrounds. For a moment he looked around, puzzling over which reflection to look at. Then he got his bearings. "Snowy," he called out again, running away from the mirrors and passing a stall where an array of antiques were on display. A salesman was one of the market's features. A pipe-smoking older gentleman by the name of Crabtree. Most of what he had spread out in the stall was cheap junk labeled as antiques to fool tourists. But placed in the corner of the display, as if Crabtree had known it'd be better than the rest of his wares, was a magnificent model of a sailing ship. Snowy appeared from the crowd as Tintin bent down to get a better look at the model. "Snowy," he said, "look at this." Snowy plopped down next to Tintin and tilted his head to consider the ship. "Triple-masted double-decks, 50 guns," Tintin said. "Isn't she a beauty?" Snowy stumped his stubby tail on the ground. "That's a very unique specimen, that is," Crabtree said. "From an old sea captain's estate." Tintin read the tiny lettering on the stern. "The Unicorn." "Yes, the Unicorn," Crabtree said. "Man-of-war sailing ship. It's very old, that is, 16th century." Tintin could tell at a glance that the Unicorn was not that old. The lines were all wrong, not to mention the guns. 17th, I should think, he argued. Reign of Charles the First, proclaimed Crabtree, whose description of his words were rarely based on facts. Again, Tintin felt it necessary to correct him. "Charles II," he said. "Charles the First had been gone long before ships were of this type were built." "That's why I said Charles II," the vendor went on smoothly. Tintin had to admire his persistence. "As fine as a ship ever sailed the 7 seas. You won't find another one of these, mate." "Mate?" Tintin thought. Crabtree was turning into an old sea captain himself. "And it's only £2, Crabtree said. "Ah," Tintin thought, "now we get to the point." He looked down at Snowy, who still had stopped wagging. "I'll give you £1," he said. "Done." Crabtree looked satisfied. Tintin wondered if he could have taken even less. Well, too late. Tintin gave him the pound note and took the wonderful model as Crabtree lifted it out of his display case and handed it over. "Easy does it," Crabtree said, being careful of the tiny riggings and masts. "Excuse me," a voice called out from the crowd. "An American," Tintin guessed by the sound of him. As Tintin glanced over the direction of the voice, the Unicorn slipped a bit in the scraps. "Here you go, careful," Crabtree cautioned, putting a hand out to steady it. The source of the loud American voice proved to indeed be a loud American with a black mustache wearing a blue suit and a fedora. He shoved his way through the crowd and arrived with one hand already reaching for his pocket. "Hey, bud," he said to Crabtree, nodding at the Unicorn. "How much for the boat?" "I'm sorry," Crabtree said, "but I've just sold it to this young gent." "Oh, yeah?" the American asked. He spun and leaned in towards Tintin, crowding him aggressively. "Tell me what you paid and I'll give you double." "Double?" Crabtree echoed, shocked. Tintin thought this vendor was pretending to be shocked at the American's poor manners, but he was actually shocked that he had missed out on a chance to make more money. "Thanks," Tintin said, "but it's not for sale." The American tried a different tack. He draped an arm over Tintin's shoulder, and Tintin let him, knowing that Americans were very familiar sometimes. "Look, kid, I'm trying to help you out," he said. "The name's Barnaby. I don't think you realize this, but you're about to walk into a whole mess of danger." He darted his eyes back and forth as if trying to emphasize the danger. "Danger?" Tintin repeated. "Where there was danger, usually there were good stories as well, and as a journalist, Tintin loved nothing better than a good story. Well, except perhaps a good story that also involved a good adventure along the way. Tintin didn't think stories were worthwhile unless they involved mysteries for him to solve. He had often stumbled upon crimes and secrets and taken jaw-dropping risks as he investigated odd events in the name of journalism. He just couldn't resist the clue. Before he could get anything else out of Barnaby, though, the American saw something in the crowd and a look of alarm appeared on his face. "I'm warning you, get rid of the boat and get out while you still can," he hissed into Tintin's ear. "These people do not play nice." What people? Tintin asked, but he got no answer from Barnaby's back as Barnaby melted into the market crowds. Wonderful, another voice said. Tintin turned to see a very tall, stooped man with a long black beard and a tiny pair of glasses perched on the narrow bridge of his nose. Everything about him was long and angular. His coat hung on him as if his shoulders were a coat hanger. His beard and swooping mustache ended in points. Even his tall bowler hat somehow lost its look of roundness when surrounded by so many sharp angles and lines. Despite his thinness, he looked energetic and powerful. Perhaps this was because he was dressed in shades of red, with a crimson tie setting off the darker red of his suit and vest. It's just wonderful, the man repeated, removing his hat to bend close to the ship. His hair swept back from a high forehead, was dramatically streaked with white. Don't bother wrapping it. I'll take it as is. Does anybody accept if I pay by check? Crabtree cast a glance towards the skies. Tintin could tell he was wishing he never opened his stall that morning. If you want to buy it, Crabtree said wearily, you'll have to talk to the kid. I see, the tall man said. He put his face close to Tintin's. Well, let the kid name his price. That, Tintin saw, was about all Crabtree could stand. The vendor slumped in his chair. Name his price, he echoed in quiet despair. 10 years I've been flogging bric-a-brac, and I miss name your price by a bleeding 1 minute. I'm sorry, Tintin said. I already explained to the other gentleman. The model ship's latest suitor immediately looked angry at the idea that there was another gentleman. He scanned the crowd, his bearded face darkening with a frown that teetered on the edge of his skull. American he was, Crabtree added helpfully. All hair oil and no socks. Tintin knows his lack of socks, too. He had a hard time imagining how anyone could walk through the marketplace without socks. It's not for sale, he said to the bearded man, a little more firmly this time. Then let me appeal to your better nature, came the reply. The bearded man swept his arm out in a grand gesture, though what to intend to convey Tintin did not know. I have recently acquired Marlinspike Hall, and this ship, as I'm sure you're aware, was once part of the estate of the late sea captain. Tintin asked, wanting more of the story. He now thought that the strange Manchester might have been intended to indict the direction of the Marlinspike Hall, which lay over the horizon in the hilly countryside outside of town. The family fell upon hard times, the bearded man said, with the tone of someone repeating a story he has told many times. They've been living in a cloud of bad luck ever since. We are taking generations of irrational behavior. It's a very, very sad story. I'm sorry, Tintin said, but as I told you before, it's not for sale. The bearded man's face contorted into an angry glare. Good day to you, sir, Tintin said. He nodded, made sure the mall ship was secure in the crook of his elbow, and made his way into the market. Snowy, with a toss of his snout, followed. Behind him, Tintin heard the bearded man say to Crabtree, the young man, what's his name? Him? Crabtree said, sounding incredulous that anyone would ask such a question. Everybody knows him. That's Tintin. Tintin smiled to himself. Maybe not everyone yet, he thought, but someday everyone would know him. That much was certain.